Hey guys, how is everybody? Welcome back to Simplified Gardening and this live stream, Grow Your Greens, Unveiling Your First Vegetable Garden. Now, it's been a relatively busy couple of weeks for me. Firstly, we managed to get a video out last week and there's another one dropping tomorrow, so I really hope you're going to tune into that because this video, I think will help a lot of you that are out there. Secondly, we've had a real big week. Not only have I had to hand in the work for the third book, so that's now all complete and it's now with the publisher. So we've had to get that done. For me to hit the deadline, which was the 20th of March, I had to do a 48-hour stint because everything just went wrong at the time. All my photos uploaded to the cloud, and the cloud decided to rename them all numerically instead of the names I gave them and everything else, and then I had to download them all again, and it was an absolute nightmare. But we got through it, and the third book is now off. The second book, which is part of the name of this live stream, Your First Vegetable Garden, that launches in 2 weeks on the 7th of April. I know loads of you already know this, and there are others been asking time and time again. Launch day 7th of April. The book will be available right through Amazon and other bookshops, and if the bookshop near you doesn't have it, ask them and they'll be able to order it. So I'm just going to do a little bit of housekeeping before we go in and start talking about the topic today. So, as normal, at the top of the chat, you'll see that blue bar with the Q&A on it. If you click on that, you can change that to, live chat, normal chat, and then there's a Q&A section. So if you've got any questions, slam them in the Q&A section. That way I can find them because I'm a one-man show here, as you know, and it'll make life much, much easier for me as well. So, one thing before we go on, I think what we'll do, before we get into the content, I'll just change this. That box there, well, that box is a box of the new books, and we're going to open that box together, and you'll have to excuse me having a little drink because I've had a hard day at work. I've literally just come in, set up, and we're now live here. So there's loads of you in, and loads of regular names, so welcome to everybody for tuning in. So I think what we'll do, let's open this box and then we can really get into the content. So I'm gonna keep this camera on so I can clear the desk a little bit. Okay, so got a little knife here. And I think as well, I've had a few of these boxes. This isn't the only one. And I've sent some of these out to some people who will, be other creators who will be looking at them for me. So let's chuck the paper down here. There it is, guys. Your first vegetable garden. Now, let's change across to the other camera and we'll have a little chat about it. Let's just get everything back here how we should be. That way. There we are. Right, okay. So I hope you can all hear me okay. So, Your First Vegetable Garden, guys, is a book. As you can see, it is thick. This book is 340 pages. And it's taken a long time to write this book. It's full of information. It's about a third bigger than Composting Masterclass, just to give you some sort of idea. Now, what this book does, it takes you along the journey of getting your very first plot of land, whether that be a backyard, whether it be an allotment, whether it be some small holding or homestead down the road. It's taking that land from the scrub land that it is and setting up all of the foundations, all of the structure, taking you through creating beds, improving soil, right the way through to seed sowing, soil testing. It's basically everything. All of the crops that you'd want to grow are in here and how to grow them. And it will take you through seed saving at the end. And then it has a whole section on jobs to do for the month. And right after that, it has a section on getting ready for the following year. So this is like a 1 year Bible that will show you. You can see just how thick this book is. With that, there is a bit of a price difference over Composting Masterclass, but it is well worth the price. It's justified in the amount of content that is in this book. And what I didn't want to do was produce a book where you had to buy like a part 1 and a part 2 just to be able to get that year. So someone who, obviously with it being a first vegetable garden, who has never grown before or has just taken over a new piece of ground, they could take this book and in that very first year have it all set up, have crops that they're harvesting, that they can put food on the table and be ready for the following year. And with that jobs to do month by month, they'll know exactly where they are as well. So that's all in this book, guys. And as you can see, like I said, it's a real big thick book and it took a long time. So what I wanted to talk about today is what we would do if we were setting up this new garden. So it's your first veg garden, and I know a lot of you are already, big growers and stuff like that. But I think the first thing that we need to talk about is things like setting up the structures in the garden, because structure is really important. When we first get to the garden, too many people are like, right, okay, I've got to dig this over and I've got to start getting plants in. And typically we tend to get the garden at the wrong time. But what I would suggest you do is just hold back that little bit. Start making a plan in your head. Get a piece of paper out, draw out the dimensions of the garden and think, right, what is the main things in there? Now, the things we're looking for are structures like sheds. Do we need a potting shed or a storage shed? Where is that going to go? Where would be the best place for that? And then we need a water catchment system, especially if we haven't got tapped water there. We need to be able to find a way of catching that. So we'll need that structure in that's close to the sheds and things like that so that we can catch that water. We want to be looking at things like greenhouses and polytunnels. Where are they going to go? Because if we've got a potting shed, we don't want to be walking from one end of the garden to the other in order to be able to transfer plants from one end to the other. It's just doesn't seem right. Then we need to be looking at things like compost bins. As you know, I'm a big fan of compost. So, compost bins, where was the best place to place those? We need to be thinking about pathways, raised beds if you're going to have them, okay? Or pathways between the beds that are in ground. All of this structure comes before anything else. And you may think it's weird, but it's just even, silly little things like, am I going to get poultry? If I am, where's the best place for them? And when you're situating these things, you want to play around with it on the piece of paper that you're drawing it out. Draw it out, and don't just draw it once. Draw it 5, 6, 7 times and alter things within that drawing and think, right, okay, where, which is the best situation? Well, I've got to go from here to the compost bin. Are the compost bins in the right location to make it easy for me to get the compost to the beds and vice versa, the material from the beds to the compost? Think of these things. What you don't want to be doing with water if you're going to be running hoses. Are you going to be snapping plants by dragging them over beds and things like that? Could we put in a water irrigation system? These are all things that we need to think about before we start even thinking about growing and what we're going to grow. Okay, the structure is the backbone of your garden, and it'll make or break your garden. If you get that right, gardening is really easy and it doesn't have to be hard. Okay, let's just have a little look through some of these comments a moment, because I know I've been skipping over and everything else. So I want to thank Danny firstly for jumping in and moderating, and I can see he's chucking links up. So as Danny's put up now, he's putting up email addresses. Your first at simplifiedgardening.com and compost at simplifiedgardening.com. They are email addresses if you want to buy a signed copy of these books. Now, all it is an expression of interest at this point, okay? And they'll be sent out after the launch date. I will have to order them, and you would need to prepay them, because I'd need to order them to come to me first in order for me to sign and ship. But they will be shipping. I'll give you an example. I think to ship out to the States is about £11. It's not cheap because of the weight of the book. In the UK, I think it's about £3.50. So we need to take that into consideration when you're doing that. But if you don't want the signature, you can just wait until launch day and buy it on Amazon or anywhere else, and it'll be delivered to your door, and it'll probably be coming under Amazon Prime and be free. But I just wanted to offer an alternative for anybody who wanted a signed copy, because people have been nagging for that with Composting Masterclass. Eventually I will get it set up on the site, on the website, where you can just go there and just purchase, okay? So let's have a look what's going on here. Yeah, so Jay saying unboxing the new book. Yeah, I thought that, it'd be, a nice thing to show you guys. So like I said, we've got 2 weeks, guys. That's all it is for the second book. It's surprising how long it's been in one aspect, but how quick it's been in another. When you think that Composting Masterclass only came out on the 13th of May last year, and in that time, this book has not only been thought of, but it's been written and born, and it's now in book fashion. A lot of work goes into that. So let's have a look here. So I can see loads of you are in, 118 viewers. Guys, if you haven't already, please do me a favour, let YouTube know that this is something worth sharing, and slam that like button, and let's get this out to people. We're going to be talking about the whole sort of gardening year as we are here today. So again, Jay and Danny, both of you, thank you very much for moderating tonight. I really appreciate that. And you're slamming out all the links for everybody, which is excellent. I appreciate that too. So let's have a look. Scott's just posted my big announcement on social media. Thank you very much, Scott. I really appreciate that. And I'm sure you and I will be chatting very shortly. So I'm just going to change over to the live, over to the questions, see if there's anything in there. Yes, there are. Okay. So Dion's asking, I have a rhubarb patch. How do you get them so huge? So like any other sort of leafy crop, they love nitrogen. There is a video on the channel. I don't know if one of the mods can find that link for you. It's called Growing Rhubarb So Big, to feed a dinosaur, something like that. And basically in it, I break down exactly what you need to do, Dion. But it starts now, before the crowns are really starting to bud, and you need to really feed it loads of manure, so chicken manure pellets, things like this, and it needs the water now, not later. Okay, the more water you can get into that ground now, that sets it up ready for that big lush growth that we see. And you'll see mine will be, I'm already got the manure pellets on mine, and you'll see it this year, it'll be just as large as normal. Okay. Matthew, I don't know if this is Matthew or Lisa, having poor germination this year, doing what we normally do. Any ideas? It could be down to the weather. We've had hot and cold days, and we've had some really cold weather, so I don't know where you're germinating. It could also be down to the seed. If you've kept your own seed, were they stored right? Were they kept at a decent, cool temperature but not freezing? These sort of things, were they dried properly in the first place? Or if it's old seed, how old is it? Maybe do some more test germinations. Maybe the compost was just too cold. And I'll give you a prime example of that. I sowed some broad beans or fava beans, depending where you are, on the 27th of January. And Danny will tell you, I sent him a photograph or a bit of a video clip about, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 days ago, and those seeds are only just pushed their heads through the soil. I was getting ready to throw the compost out of the trays and re-sow. And so it just shows that even though we think it's time that they go, if that nighttime temperature isn't just right, that seed knows when it's going to germinate. So just give it a bit longer and maybe they will come. Rob, if you have some compost left over from last year and is slightly dried out, is it suitable to use, or won't it hold water or slash moisture as well? Rob, never ever ever throw away compost. Okay, it can always be rejuvenated. Literally, you can just either mix it in with a new batch of compost if you're that worried about it, but just water it, and you'll need to give it a couple of waters, but it'll soon start absorbing water again, and away you'll go. But it's don't it, at the end of the day, if you just use it as a growing medium, and there's no life left in it, it doesn't really matter at this point because you're just germinating seeds. If you were looking to feed something, I'd probably put it back through the composting process. Right, let's have a look. Yeah, the Muffin Man. Can I grow potatoes in my house, start to finish? You can. You would need lots of light, so you would, and you need to keep the temperature sort of quite sort of average, around about 18 to 20 would be ideal, but it's the light you would need at that point. And to be honest with you, that's a lot of faff in the house. They take huge amounts of water, and where's all that water going to go? It's going to evaporate into the house. You're likely to cause mold if you haven't got ventilation in there. You know, it's not. I wouldn't recommend it. Put it that way, but you can do it. Right, we'll do one more, and then we will go back to some other stuff. Should I water my potatoes more or less when they begin to yellow last week or two before tops die? This is Frank Barnwell. Frank, when it comes to potatoes, as soon as you see those flower buds starting to form, you really need to be piking the water onto those potatoes. Don't ever let them dry out, because that's the point that the tubers are forming. Take the flower buds off. Don't let them flower. If you let them flower, what's happening is all the energy is going into producing the flower and then later on seed. We don't want that. We want that energy going into the tuber. So that's the point you start watering, and then don't stop watering then. So just do the finger test. If it's moist, don't water. If it starts drying out, then water again, okay? And keep doing that until about 50% of the foliage is yellowed, at which point you can stop watering, cut all the hulls off the top of the potatoes and leave them in the buckets for another 2 weeks. And that way the skins will harden off and you'll get a much better potato that will store better. And by that point they will have done all the growing, and you've provided the water, more importantly, at the correct time. Right, so let me just jump out of the questions for a moment. I want to come back into a live chat. So there's loads happening in live chat as well. So we've got 122 of you again, guys. If you haven't already, smash that thumbs up for me. So we've basically spoken about the structure of our garden, and this structure, like I said, is the most important factor here. It's not the growing of the vegetables, that comes later on, but if we get this structure right and we get our garden set up right, it's going to make life much easier. Next then, we need to look at, okay, how am I going to grow? Am I going to grow in ground, or am I going to grow in raised beds? If I'm going to grow in raised beds, I need to build those. And incidentally, raised beds or filling raised beds is what tomorrow's video is going to be on. And it's a video that I spent a fair bit of time on. So I'm hoping that you guys really enjoy it and get something out of it, because the topic is filling raised beds for free. And as you guys know, it's all about saving money at the moment with the cost of living crisis. And also, when you've got deep raised beds, it is expensive to buy compost to put in them. And I don't want to waste the compost I spent 6 months making just to fill a raised bed. So I show you a completely free way to fill them, and we take you through that process as we go. So that'll be a really good video. So we're deciding how we are growing. raised beds or in ground, or whether we are going to do something like containers. So we want to think about this, and once we know that, then we can put that structure in place as well. So now we've got our potting sheds, we've got our greenhouses, we've got our pathways, we've got our beds. We're pretty much set up on the structure side of things. Next job, we need to fill those, but tomorrow's video will cover that. And then after that point, we can start looking at soil amendments, okay? Now, the biggest thing that a lot of people do is they get in their garden and the first thing they do is, right, this garden hasn't been used for a long time. I've got to go now and start chucking in lots of different amendments, and they go out and they buy tons of food for the garden and they just chuck it in and they're hoping for the best when they don't really know what that soil needs. Now, if you're growing, if the soil is covered over with weed, the chances are it's got pretty much everything it needs, but don't count on that. Send some samples of your soil off to a lab. There's quite a few if you go on my website, there is an article on there about soil testing, and it gives you 10 labs in the US, 10 labs in the UK, and I think a couple of labs in Australia. And these labs, for a couple of quid, I think it's about 20 odd pounds, or $30, something like that, will do a complete soil analysis for you. They will break it down to the cobalt, the boron, and all of these things that really play a part when you're growing. And if you're having a new garden, this soil test is going to allow you to understand where your baseline is. And once you understand that baseline, it will come back and it will say, for argument's sake, nitrogen is low, and it will give you a readout of exactly what you need to add per square meter of your garden and how much of it. And that is gold, because you know exactly that once you add this amount, that garden is going to be perfect for growing your vegetables in, okay? Now, you only need to do those soil tests once every 3 or 4 years, something like that, all right? And in between, you can be doing your own little sort of DIY soil tests that you can buy from Amazon or any other stores, okay? It's fine for that. But when you're first setting up a garden, it's really important to understand the structure of your soil and things like that. So we now know we've got everything set up. We now know how we're growing, and the beds are all full of soil and it's amended. So we're pretty much ready now to start thinking about what we want to grow, but not quite. Okay, so we now need to figure out what light is important to us. Okay, where are we going to be growing our greens that don't need as much light, like lettuce, things like that? So we want to track the light for maybe a day or two. Where does it come up in the morning? What beds are getting the most light? What angle is it at? What direction does it come from? When we know this, if we were to get a bed here and the sun was over here and we planted all corn along here, anything on this side of the bed isn't getting any light. And this is what allows us to plan the garden properly. So track that light around and we can then see, right, okay, this is the best place to be planting all of these crops. The light's over here, let's get all our tall stuff in this side of the beds so we're not shielding everything else from the light. And if we can't help but shield, then maybe behind them is an ideal place for putting lettuce, those other crops that don't require as much sun, okay? And like I said, in the book, we have a whole section, for argument's sake, this is chapter 8, and it's about growing herbs, and and it's a complete breakdown. So on this page here, we've got basil, and it takes you through everything that particular plant needs, why it needs it, the amount of sun it needs, the watering it needs. So each plant has that breakdown for you in order to be able to figure that out. So with the information in that book, we can then say, right, for argument's sake, basil needs lots of sun. It's an ideal a companion plant to go with tomatoes. Might be better off in the tunnel with the tomatoes or in the greenhouse with the tomatoes. So this allows you to be able to plan properly, especially because new gardeners don't really know about this sort of stuff, and that's the ideal. So let's have a little look at what's going on in the chat here. So Duncan sent an email. Thank you, Duncan. Appreciate that. Matthew's thanking me for his question. So's the Muffin Man. Let's have a look what we're going on here. So Taffy's asking a question, and it's not in the question page, but I'll answer it at the moment. So he's asking, do you recommend covering your soil in winter to keep weeds down? So that's a bit of a broad question, Taffy. I wouldn't cover it with something like plastic or anything like that, because what you want to be doing is keeping your soil alive through winter. That microbial life in your soil is still alive, and you want to keep that thriving. And the only way to do that is either to put a compost layer on and just let the weather beat that compost, because that acts as a shield. See, when soil is just left bare, the rain hammers it, which compacts the soil. It turns the all of the little sort of gravel bits within soil, they compress together and they compact, okay? That's when you get the erosion and the soil washing away and everything else. If we was to put a green manure or compost on that soil, we are feeding the microbial life, we're putting in nitrogen, and we're protecting that soil from the battering of the rain completely, okay? And so that is the best way to go about it. Use an organic mulch, if you like, of some sort, whether it's a green manure that you're growing or it's a compost mulch or a bark chip or something like that to cover the ground. If you were going to use like a sheet mulch, cardboard would probably be better than most of them, or then go to something like maybe Hessian sacks, or even you can buy these membranes now, but I wouldn't go to a full sheet of plastic. That does a couple of issues. Firstly, yes, it stops the rain, but what it does, the ground dries out over winter then, and a lot of that microbial life will die off or go dormant. But the other thing is, it's a breeding ground for slugs, so I would stay away from the plastic mulches. If you find that you're doing, like a no-dig sort of scenario, and you've just got a load of weed or grass there already, then a plastic mulch can help to sort of solarize those weeds and kill those weeds off. So in that sort of aspect, it's fine to use. So when we say don't use something, we don't mean indefinitely. Once your ground is sorted, you don't want to be using it then, right? Think about more organic things. Okay. So thank you, Jay, for putting up those articles, the soil test kits and the whether or not you should test before planting a garden. Those are the articles that we were talking about, and I'm hoping that you guys are taking notice of these articles and things like that, because they will really help you understand where you are in your garden. All right, it does make a big difference. Let's have a look here. Right, I'm just going to jump back to some questions. So let's get back on that page. Frank Barnwell. So, the Lightly's garden. Has anyone grown squash in tubs? Can it be done? Is it successful? Yes, it's been done, and I've grown all sorts of squash, like even like zucchini's a squash, courgettes, they're a squash, but you can plant them in a tub. You're going to be watering a lot though. If you're going to put them in as big a tub as possible, and just allow them to trail, or to climb some sort of trellis, that's something like that, that's near you, and they'll be fine. So if you're on a hard standing, a patio or something like that, yeah, plant them in a big tub. Just remember, you're going to have to continually feed and water, but they will grow and they will climb or sprawl, whatever you want them to do. Silver Lady, for the first time this year, I've bought organic non-GMO seeds and have failed to germinate bar one seed. Are organic seeds less robust, or do they need to be treated differently? No, they're not less robust at all. I think what what we're finding at the moment is there are seed suppliers and then there are seed suppliers, okay? And if it's not a reputable seed supplier, you don't know if that seed has been dried properly. It could be that they're moving on old seed. It could be that they weren't stored correctly, and that's why you're having poorer germination. But don't always just write off the seed either, because it could be the compost. If you've bought shop bought compost and that was made from green waste that's been collected that had a broadleaf herbicide within it, well, that herbicide could come through the composting process, and that could be preventing your seeds from germinating as well. So just bear that in mind. What I would suggest you do first off, before you worry about tossing those seeds, I'd go and get some compost from somewhere else, or some even some soil from the garden, and just put a bit of perlite within it. All right, and then sow some seed in that and see if that germinates. Make sure you're giving it the right temperature and just a little bit of moisture, and if they germinate in that, it's definitely the compost. If they don't germinate, it's the seed. All right. Okay, how do you know when a very hot compost has finished and ready to use? If it's still hot, it's not finished. So what happens with compost? Okay, it goes up to thermophilic layers. It comes up, it hits a peak, and then it starts cooling down. And when you turn it, what's happening as it's cooling down is those thermophilic bacteria are starting to have used up a lot of the food that they use, and the moisture and things like that, and then it starts to cool down. And the cooling down process is you knowing exactly, hang on, we are starting to lose something here. Either we've lost our food, we've lost the moisture, or we are finished. Okay, so you got those sort of things. So first things first, or the other thing that they could have done lost there is air. Okay, but if this is your first time, the likelihood is it wouldn't be finished if you're still seeing organic matter. All right, so those three things. So we're talking food, moisture, and air. Okay, so more often than not, we can grab a handful of it and squeeze it. If we can't get a drop of water out, or we can get more than one drop of water out, it's either too wet or too dry. But if you squeeze it and you can't get any water out, but it stays in a ball, but then when you do that, it breaks up, it's got enough moisture. Okay, if it doesn't go into a ball, it's too dry. So we know we need to add moisture. If the moisture is correct and we can still see organic matter in it, we know we've got food and we know we've got moisture. So the only thing it can be that's allowing it to start on the cool is air. It doesn't have enough air. So we turn the compost pile. When we turn that compost pile, we introduce air. You should see a second spike then. Okay, so it comes down like this and it goes up to a second spike. But the second spike won't be as high as the first spike was. Okay, and eventually it'll come down again. So we go through the process again. Can we still see organic matter? If we can, it's got food. Right, can we squeeze it? What's that like? Is that balling up? Yes, great. Did it drop more than 1 or 2 drops of water? Because if it's dropped more, we need to add more carbon. If it hasn't dropped any, then does it stay in a ball? Yes, it does. Great. We need to add air, so we need to do more air. So we need to turn it again. And this is how you control compost, guys, okay? And eventually it'll get to the point where you've got enough water, most of the organics are gone, and once you turn it, it still doesn't heat up. That's when we are then going through the curing process, at which point you can just leave it sit there. That's when all of the wood lice, the worms, the bacteria will stay there, the fungi will take over from the bacteria, and it will finish cure and mature that compost for you. And at that point you could probably use it as a mulch, but if you want to use it for any seed starting or anything like that, then you just leave it for that little while longer for it to mature. And once you've done that, you're away. And that's all compost is managing that curve, or that sine wave I like to call it. If you manage that right, you'll always get compost. Okay. Hope that answered it for you, Warren. Okay, have you ever grown mushrooms, and how do you start? Mark, yes, I have a video on it. If one of the guys or one of the mods can find that, it's about growing mushrooms in logs. And I'm actually planning another mushroom which we're going to grow in sawdust. So I've got one of those videos planned for this year. There's a lot of different ways. The log one will show you, the video will show you that. The sawdust one, I've got a video coming for that, so I'm not going to go too much into it. But you need to make sure that your substrate is sterile when you're growing most of these mushrooms in things like wood chips or wood shavings, sawdust, those sort of things, okay? But essentially with that you would buy a spawn, so it's an inoculated spawn which basically comes like a grain, and it's usually white and fuzzy, which is the mycelium, and then that gets broken up into your substrate of choice. You pack that into bags and you put it in a dark warm area to allow it to mature. It can be in a light area, but they prefer the dark. Okay. So, Kim, is your book available somewhere other than Amazon? Yes, Kim, it will be available. Composting Masterclass is available anywhere in all bookshops, and so will your first vegetable garden. This will be available in pretty much all bookshops around the world, but you may either have to ask them to order it, or you may have to give them a little bit of time to realize that it's there. But you will also see it if you give it a couple of weeks, sort of by the time it launches, you should start being able to do a Google search for it, and all the bookstores that are, online bookstores that are selling it, they'll be able to tell you whether they've got it in stock. And more like Composting Masterclass, although we had a few problems with that last year, it was available in the shops before it was available on Amazon, thanks to Amazon's stupid systems. But like I said, it will be available in all bookstores and online as well. Besides, eventually I will get around to doing an audio book for this. There is an ebook version available, and I will eventually get a hard book available. But for now, it's only the paperback and ebook that will be available. The audio book, what I took away from the Composting Masterclass was I didn't do it because I didn't have the setup back then, whereas now I could use the studio. But people wanted me to read it rather than somebody else. So eventually I will when I can get some time, I will sit down, I will record that, and it'll be available in audiobook. But that might be 6-8 months time from now, depending on when I can find the time, but it will come eventually. Is it too early to sow mid and late potato seeds? Not really. If you're sowing them in the ground, I would probably hold off to the end of the month. I'm not sowing any of my seed potatoes until the last day of March, only because what I don't want to have to do is move out containers of potatoes when they are large, because I've had to keep them in because of the late frost or something like that. So I'm holding off this year till the end of March. And in fact, that video will launch on the 31st of March. So the video will be done for that day. And obviously, I'll be growing mine in containers again, and I'll be showing you what I'm using as a medium this year after the devastation of the peat-free compost we had last year. Is it worth growing under LED lights? That depends what it is. If you're growing chilies and tomatoes, just like I am down there, then yes. Look, you have to weigh up the cost of everything. LED is relatively cheap to run. I'm quite lucky now that the solar is all finally working. So all of this is running off solar at the moment, so I'm not really worried about the bills anymore. But I do appreciate that not everyone's in my position, okay? So, but with LED, they are relatively cheaper to run over, sort of the fluorescent style lights and things like that, like T5s and T8s. So what I would suggest is keep your crops that need the light and warmth for the propagators and the lighting and things like that, like I have with the tomatoes and the chilies. That's the only thing that's in there at the moment, plus some sweet potatoes for some slips. Everything else is in my unheated polytunnel and it's growing fine up there. I've got a diesel generator, diesel heater, Chinese diesel heater for up there. It's still in the box. I haven't even taken it out yet. So I don't even know if I'll get around to it this year because things are seeming to grow. And all I'm doing is I'm just covering it over if I need to, okay? I'm not in a rush this year. I made a point of holding back on most of my sowings. But with things like the chilies and the tomatoes, they need time. And believe it or not, the tomatoes only just germinated. I only put them in about 4 or 5 days ago, and they're up like this at the moment. So, but the chilies are a bit further along. But you have to weigh it up. Is it important to you? Hi Tony, how do I go about pruning a cherry tree? I got to the point last summer that 30% of the fruit was out of reach within the orchard to net the harvest time, and tips would be much. Cherry trees, you should have been done by now, okay? You're a bit late for it this year, so I would wait now till next year and then do it right at the end of winter before spring kicks in, before those buds start breaking. That's an ideal time to do it. And just get up there and cut it to the height you want and just sort of put yourself to the realization that you're going to lose all of that fruit from up above there, and it's going to take time for it to branch out properly below. But you can control that tree's height from that point on then. But pick a day where it isn't going to be hammering down with rain over the next few days. You want those cuts to callus over and dry out before you have rain, which can introduce infection into your cuts and things like that. All right. Is there organic pest control that I can use on vegetables? Sorry, I'm a newbie. There's lots of organic pest control, and the first thing I would suggest you consider is companion planting, because lots of plants will put off others. For argument's sake, French marigolds will put off aphids and all sorts of things, and we go about pest control in the book. Where we talk about companion planting and what would be best to put with what and why, okay? The next thing that you should be thinking about doing is bringing the wildlife into the garden. Too many people worry way too much about the pests in the garden, and they see like some aphids and they go, oh my God, and they start getting out the chemical pesticides and things like that, right? You just need to understand that not far behind those pests are the predators that are going to take those pests, okay? The ladybirds, the lacewings, and things like that. They're all going to come and take those. And but by providing habitat in the garden, just like, I know it sounds crazy, but a little bucket of stingy nettles, which gives them the breeding area that they need, will attract them into your garden. And in fact, the video on stinging nettles I done actually talks about that. Get a wildlife pond in your garden if you can, or even just a small bowl of water, something that's going to attract in the wildlife, and that will make a big difference. And then, it's understanding how plants actually work. Plants only get attacked by pests if they're stressed and weak. So if we can prevent that by caring for the plants better, you're going to see far less pest species in the garden, because it's easier for them to go to a different garden and attack weaker, stressed plants. So consider that as well. All right. Right. So before I go on, let's turn that one off. Before I go on, so we're going to talk now a little bit about we've tested our soil, we know now where we're going to be planting, and then we now need to start talking about seed. So where are we buying our seed? When are we buying it? And things like that. So if we're talking things like potatoes, you need to be buying those probably before Christmas for most places, or you know, I'm basing it on when the UK and most of the US would need to buy them, okay? But obviously, if you're in Australia, I appreciate that everything is the reverse, all right? So you'll be buying them more probably June or July at that point. But you want to buy them early because although we're not planting them until March, you know, number one, if you leave it, you're not going to get the varieties that you want. And number two, we want to chit them. Now, you know, there's a lot of debate over whether chitting actually works or doesn't. I've proven that chitting first and second early or determinate potatoes works. And the reason for that is because usually when they are planted, it's much cooler and they've already got that head start. Main crop potatoes, there's not much of a difference, so it makes no difference at all. But if you've bought them, it's the chitting them is the best way of preserving that potato. Okay, so so I always chit my potatoes for those reasons. All right, we need to think about what vegetables. So we get a list of the vegetables that we want, and then we're going to look for decent seed companies. Do we want F1s or are we looking at seed collection? Okay, do we want to collect our own seed and be more self-sufficient? So then we're looking at heritage seeds. A lot of people are looking at heritage seeds, but I'm not afraid to growing F1s. I've got F1s in my garden. I just won't collect seed from those. But by growing heritage varieties, it enables me to collect most of the seed for my garden so that I'm more self-sufficient. Now, when we had the big CV, we, people couldn't even buy seed here, and it's only when things like that happen do you realize, well, hang on a second, I've got all this garden and everything else, and I'm not as self-sufficient as I need to be because now I can't get seed, I can't grow anything. But if you're collecting your seed, you're the master of your garden, all right? So, we look at a list of stuff we want, and then we decide which we want, and then we go and find where we're going to buy it. There are lots of different places you can buy online, you can buy in stores. There are cheap companies now, and there are expensive companies. And what I'm finding with some of the cheaper companies, they'll do like seed packs for like 99 cents or 99 pence or whatever the case being. And there's 4 or 5 seed in the packet, whereas you may pay £3 for a packet or $4.50, but there's like 20 or 30 seeds. So when you think about the economy of those seeds, it's actually cheaper to get the more expensive packet, depending on, especially if they've got a long shelf life, if you know you're going to grow, year on year, or you're not going to keep your own seeds. Okay, so consider that. And then we need to start sort of sowing those seeds. And I've just done a sowing video last week where we're sowing into trays. You can sow directly into the ground, and you just need to pick the type of seeds and things like that and when you're going to do it. And the timing is important here. Like we just spoke now about the chilies and the tomatoes. If we are sowing those in the colder months, we need to provide light. Do we want to go down that road? Have we got the space to do that? Yeah. Next year, I'm going to be, well, not next year, probably later this year, I'm going to be showing you a system that I'm able to do now where I'm going to be growing, so it's not at the house at all. These sort of things that we can think of as we go on. And if we're going to sow them direct, then we need to wait until our soil is warm, at least 10 degrees, before most things will even allow you to put them in the soil, and more like 15 plus for them to germinate. So, we are talking way into April and May before you can start sowing outside properly, most things. Okay, let's have a little look what else we got going on here. Hi Tony, I'll be doing some courses with Liz this year. Will you be doing any in-person courses this year? I won't be doing any in-person courses, and the reason being is I don't own my land. It's what's known as allotment, which is in the UK it's like a community garden, and you're given a parcel of land and you can rent that until the day you die if you want to. Okay. That land, in fact, I have 3 full allotments, but that land, there's one stipulation is that you can't make any money from that land. So basically, if I was to run a course there, and I charge someone, then I would be breaking the terms of my agreement, okay? However, I am in the process of not only planning but filming digital courses. So they will be, now there will be a course on this and a course on composting. There will be a course on potatoes. There'll be a course on greenhouse growing. So there's lots of stuff that's planned, and those will start being produced now, and they'll be released later on in the year and possibly into next year. Okay, so so although they won't be in person, there will be courses available. And I think as well, in person's great. You know, I mean, I could have people come here. I just wouldn't be able to charge them. Excuse me. Or, you know, find some way around it so that the course itself isn't at the plot type of thing. But look, you know, I'm always happy to do something. Maybe eventually, if there was enough people that was interested, we could potentially do a course, or of a presentation, maybe at some sort of hotel or something like that, where I can come and speak or whatever. You know, excuse me, guys, I gotta have a drink. Right, okay. So, Jay, question: visually impaired Diane, a meter and a half troughs. Can I with fill the base up with bark and wood chips, then apply compost to grow this summer? Absolutely. Um, I wouldn't. I would. I would base them like a hugel culture bed. So I would layer it. So put the like, you know, the chunkiest stuff at the bottom and work up the finer stuff. But you need probably 8 or 12 inches of good sort of organic matter in the top. So something like manures or compost in order for those plants to root. And it would need to be something that's relatively rich in nitrogen to offset the nitrogen that will be robbed from below when it's decomposing. And I do talk about that a little bit in tomorrow's video, because tomorrow's video is using the hugel culture technique. So so make sure you view that video and you'll see how those beds are filled. What do you think of the no dig for people who have troubles digging? I love no dig, Bob. The 95% of my garden is no dig, and that's how I can manage such a large garden on my own. But I'm not afraid to dig it. If I need to dig, I will, because I know that I can repair the land afterwards. I do my very best not to dig because of the microbial life, and I understand what's going on beneath my feet. And the last thing I want to do is undo the work that I've already done, getting those microbial life working for me. If I dig it, I'm destroying that. I'm destroying all the hyphae and all of the, you know, all of the mycorrhiza that's down there. I'm destroying all of the organic waterways that have been built. You know, I do my very best not to, but I'm not au fait to dig in. If I need to dig for a reason, like for argument's sake, if bindweed got in there, or if you know, I was getting tons and tons of dandelions and I had to just get them out to deal with them, I would dig it, and then I would go and set about repairing the land afterwards, okay? And by that, I would be adding tons of organic matter. I would be watering it with compost tea. I would put that life straight back in there. So Matthew, we're moving our compost bins after reading book 1. Great. First batch is halfway down. Should we top it up again or just leave it to finish? Don't top up. Okay. So when you're making your compost, make a complete bin. All right. Then if you made a couple of those complete bins and they've sunk to halfway, you can empty the one on top of the other that is at the same stage. Don't go adding any fresh stuff to the already broken down compost, because what you're doing is starting the process all over again, but then you don't have the proper ratios to keep it right. Because if you remember in the book, we talk about that 30-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio, and by the time it's nearly finished, that's dropping down to more like 10-to-1. So all of a sudden, we don't have enough carbon within the source. And then if you're adding other stuff on top, you can really screw those figures and screw up the actual composting. But it's okay to do if you've got two composts at the same stage and they're both broken down. You can then top the one up. So that's why some of my compost bins are nearly full, because over the last few months, I've literally just topped them up out of another one that is at the same stage, okay? So that's how you can do it, but don't go adding new stuff to it. Start a new pile. As you'll see from my last video, when I was by the compost bays, the new bays are full of all stuff that's just been collected there. It's not touched anything that's of the finished compost there, because I'm keeping that for my potatoes. And the last thing I want to be doing is putting new stuff with that, okay? Right. At what stage should I feed my tomato plants? Okay, so ideally, it depends how rich your ground is, all right? But you want to feed your plants two different ways. So when it's first growing, if you see at any point the tips of your leaves start to yellow or change color or anything like that, then that's the time to start feeding. If we're not at the first point where your first truss of flowers and fruit is forming, then that is the time you need to feed, and you need to feed nitrogen at that point, okay? So as long as no flowers or fruit is formed on the plant, feed nitrogen. As soon as flowers start to form, we need to turn over to a high potassium feed, like a tomato feed, or seaweed feed, something like that, and then feed that for the rest of that plant's life, okay? Because that will provide the nutrition required for flower and for fruit growth, okay? So Reflect the Sun, thank you very much for the super chat, $10. I really appreciate that. Let's have a look. Happy birthday, thank you very much. For those who don't know, my birthday was on the 21st, a couple of days ago, and so I had a well-earned rest after trying to get the third book in by the 20th, because what you didn't realize was the fuss I had of getting that book and the deadline. I did a 48-hour stint of no sleep and just constantly working on that book. So for literally 2 days, the family didn't see me. I had no sleep and nothing. So by the time I went to bed the night before my birthday, I was looking, absolute. I looked like something out of Thriller. And of course, now I've got all these little spots come up over my nose and around here because I got quite stressed over it. So thank you for the super chat. I really appreciate that. You grew some great container potatoes last year. Looking forward to planting them again soon. Yeah, aren't we all? And congratulations on growing some great potatoes in the containers. It's a fantastic way to grow them. Okay, let's have a look what else we got here, guys. By the way, guys, for anybody who super chats, okay, they jump the queue because obviously they've donated to support, all right? So you just have to bear with me while I answer their questions first, because it's only fair that if they're supporting financially, then they get their question read out first, okay? Read somewhere, if rhubarb freezes, it's poisonous. We're expecting some minus temperatures over the weekend. Would that mean we can't use rhubarb? Rhubarb will be fine. The plant itself freezes every single winter, all right? That's not the issue here. So as rhubarb's growing, if for argument's sake, the plant, you force that plant and you had all of those tender, stems and everything else, and that froze, then it'd be no good to you. But by the time rhubarb really gets going, most of the frost is gone, so I wouldn't really worry about it. And if you're that worried about it, get some fleece and just chuck some fleece over it. But I wouldn't really worry. Rhubarb is a real resilient plant, and I've never, ever had any issues with it. So so just bear that in mind. And we are really open on my grounds. The wind howls through there, and any light frost freezes everything. Okay. For dye, question: I have 2 times 1 meter squared width troughs. Can I fill a base 3/4 or halfway up with bark wood chips instead of using all compost? Yes, you can, dye, as we've already explained. And if you watch tomorrow's video, you will see, you know, a similar sort of thing being done. Okay. For Thomas Rule, do you follow the 30:1 ratio for your compost? If so, how do you combine the materials while ensuring the ratio? Okay. So, in the composting masterclass book, I don't even think there's a copy around you at the moment. There's a chart in there that I show you pretty much all of the organic matter that you would use within compost. So whether that's wood chips, straw, leaves, all of this stuff. And it gives you a ratio of how much carbon and how much nitrogen is in that particular ingredient. Now, it's not... The problem that a lot of people do is they think that, oh, that's a brown, so it's only got carbon in it, but it still has nitrogen as well. And also, when you look at weeds, they think, oh, that's a nitrogen source, but it also has carbon in it. In fact, weeds are actually a balanced feed. It's about 30 parts to 1 part nitrogen, so weeds are quite balanced. But what I would suggest you do is it's always by volume. So this is the thing. So if you put like a pretty much like a 50-50 mix of browns and layer it, so you get, but like a good layer of browns, but then just a smaller, thinner layer of greens, and then another good layer of browns and a smaller sort of layer of greens. I tend to aim for like a 60-40 split on the browns and greens, so more carbon, because here's the secret that most people don't realize. Carbon is used as a food source in the compost for the microbial life. Nitrogen is used in there by the microbes, but when those microbes die, that nitrogen is released back to the released back to the compost. So nitrogen never disappears. It always stays the same in one form or another, whereas carbon is actually used, and what is wasted as a byproduct, which is the heat from the microbial life. Okay, so once it's been used, that's why we end up with like a 10:1 ratio in the finished compost. The carbon haven't changed. The nitrogen hasn't changed, but the carbon has. It's been utilized by the microbial life, and that's why you get that collapsing down of the compost. Okay, so just when you're layering it, okay, you just sort of look at a 60-40 split, so about 60% of it carbon, and then a 40% layer, and then 60% carbon, a 40% layer. And the more diverse you can make the ingredients in the compost, the better quality compost you're going to have. But the secret to good compost is moisture, not the ingredients. Okay, so we all talk about the carbon to nitrogen ratio, but the number one, and it is arguable, but it's my belief that the number one factor on compost and making sure you get a good quality compost is the moisture content, and you control that and you win every time. Right. Hey Nigel, great to see you. Hi Tony, do you have any plans in the future to grow for show, either giants or quality veg? If so, what varieties? Nigel, as you know, I've done the giants for many years, but this last few years I've been busy with one thing or another. I may put in some stuff. I may put in a couple of marrows again, some zucchinis. I'm a bit late now for the cabbage this year. I've got some giant tomato seed that I might use. I've got some giant cucumber seed I might use. So I might put a few in this year, because now I've handed in the 3rd book. That's all done. That's all off my back. And I can tell you it's a massive release, because like finishing, although this book has been written nearly a year, it's all of the other stuff that goes behind it. It's the cover design, and then the layout, the formatting, the proofreading, and you know, and the structure and everything else that all needs put in there, you know, all of the surplus pages, like, you know, the acknowledgements and stuff like that, all needs to be done. And then it's got to go off to these editors and comes back to you. It's a lot of work, even when the book is finished being written. So, although now I was doing this, I was also writing the third book at the same time and getting all the photos for that and everything else. So this year has been an absolute, well, the last sort of like 10 months. And why you probably haven't seen as many videos from me, because I've been concentrating on trying to get that done. But now that's done, I can get some time that I can put back into the things that I enjoy doing, like the giant veg. I don't tend to grow for show because I'm more of a growing for eating. If I'm going to show, it tends to be a giant, because um, the rhubarb leaf that broke off that one year that I took those photos that you saw in the beginning with the slideshow, um, that was like about 1.5 ounces short on weight for the world record, and again in the length it was about a centimeter short, and the wind broke that off. So the plant has the ability to win a world record. So that's what I'm going to aim for that. But yeah, I mean, I would like to have a world record. It could go on the wall over there with a few of the other sort of plaques that I've got. It would just be nice, you know. And also we had the, you know, the Zoic Publisher of the Year award that's up there somewhere. You know, it's nice to have these little things to sort of like show, well, yeah, you know, what you're doing does work, you know. But yeah, I will do some. I don't quite know. You know, I'm not going to be pushing lots of it because, you know, I've got some other things that I want to do, like the courses, like I spoke about earlier. But I will do some. From Amanda Jane, I've been left a load of conifer chippings from my hedge being cut. What's the best way of using them? I'd probably put them down in a path or something like that and let them break down naturally as you're walking on them, and then put that maybe next year through the composting process. And that's probably the best way of using them up in the garden. Or if you've got poultry, put them down as the bedding for them and let them work their magic with them, and they'll sort that out as well. So let's get back to where we were. So we've sown our seeds. So the next part, now we've got all our seedlings, the frosts are gone, and we now need to put stuff out in the garden. And one of the biggest mistakes new sort of gardeners do is they just take their seed tray and out they go. They start sticking in the garden without acclimatizing those plants. You have to harden them off properly, and that isn't a 1 or 2 day process. If you're going to do it right, guys, you know, you might move them out of the greenhouse, you might put them into a cold frame, but you want to do this gradually. So throughout the day, you want to bring them out for a few hours, take them in. The next day, a few hours more, take them in. Then the next day, another few hours, take them in. And you're doing this over a period of about 1 or 2 weeks, to the point where they stay out all night. You know, where you're taking them out, they're out all day, you're taking them in the night, and then eventually they stay out all night for 1 or 2 nights. And as long as there's no issues there, then they're free to be planted out. That's really what you need to be looking at. And it's a faff, I know, but it's the only way to really guarantee less shock to the plant. And by doing that, because this is the stage that most plants get stressed and weak, and when the pests come, because there's not a lot else to eat out there, and all of a sudden you put out these lovely little lettuce or these nice cabbage, whatever it is, brassicas, okay, and they chucked out, and all of a sudden they start wilting, and they're like, ugh, you know. It's a perfect time for these pest species to come in and attack that plant. It's stressed, but you can avoid all of that by hardening off properly. All right. And once we've done the hardening off, we've moved out. We know our ground is right. So for your first sort of like 8 weeks, I probably wouldn't even worry about feeding or anything. I would just let the plant do its own thing. Just check those leaves. If you start seeing signs of any yellowing or any cirrhosis around the leaves or any brown tips or anything like this on the leaves, because you are the key. And a lot of people don't realize this. They don't pay enough attention to what's going on in the garden. If I come here and I see on this leaf, let me see it, on this leaf here, and I start seeing some yellowing around the edge of this plant here, or some brown tips, I know that this plant is either not having enough water or too much water, or it's a nutrition issue. Okay. Again, like with these are doing well, but I do have a plant down there that's got some brown patches on its leaf, and it's because I overwatered it. I didn't realize that I'd watered it, and I was in a rush because I was trying to get everything done, and I watered it again. I've overwatered the plant, and that plant is telling me, look, this is way too wet, and I've had to repot it to prevent losing the plant. So if you're paying attention and doing a bit of due diligence, you'll know as soon as that plant isn't happy, and then you can start feeding properly. And it could be that you're not just giving it enough water, or you're giving it too much water. Yeah. So there's things like that. We have an abundance of rats on our plots. I've seen them running in and out of my compost bins, making me feel icky. I'm dubious about using the contents. Thoughts. Compost will be fine to use. Okay. So there's a video, I don't know if one of the mods can find it. There's about keeping rats out of the compost bays. And there's a huge amount of tips in there prevent that ever happening. I've got 9 compost bays up there, and I've never had a rat in them. There are loads of things you can do, all right, and one of them is the location, and then it's about clearing up around there, how you're dealing with the ingredients you're putting in the compost. There's lots of different things, but that video will be ideal. So if Jake can find it or Danny can find it, that'll be absolutely brilliant, because that'll be a great help to you, Anita, all right? Duncan, hi Tony, just a bit of a topic here. I know you have been doing YouTube for over 10 years, 12 now. Well, actually, I've been doing YouTube since 2007. But we dumped all of the videos and started again in 2012. So we're 11 years in, nearly 12 years in on this current sort of thing. But yeah, 2007, we actually started uploading videos on YouTube. How long did it take you to get your first 1,000 subscribers? I'm at 825 after just 2 years. Right. Okay. So this is, I find quite a fascinating thing, because I hear people like yourself and others, getting annoyed because they're only at 1,000 subscribers and it's taking them a year or 2 years. It took me 7 years to get to 5,000 subscribers. Now, bear in mind, back then, most people didn't even know what YouTube was, let alone like live on it like they do today, okay? So we had different challenges. Back then, no one knew what it was, so people weren't looking for it, okay? I think there was only one ever gardening channel besides me in the UK at that point. And so it was hard to get found. YouTube didn't, when I first joined YouTube, Google had only just bought it. They had none of the search or recommendation features that they have now. And we didn't have the people on the platform like we have now. But here's the trade-off. Now, we've got all these people on the platform. You've got these fantastic search engine, because it's the second largest search engine in the world. And then you have this recommendation engine right behind it, just recommending your videos. But when you consider that there is 710,000 hours of YouTube uploaded every single minute of the day, there's a huge amount of competition as well. Okay, so what I would say to you is, don't be disheartened by the slow growth, because here's what a lot of people don't seem to realize. Growing slower is actually better for your channel, okay? Because what you're creating is 825 people who have found your channel, and they've stayed around, and that's the important part, because if they stay around, you've got that audience there that are going to view all the time. And in the big picture of things, you look at it, right? Oh, Tony's got 360,000. I've only got 825. Why is my channel growing? But it snowballs as you get bigger, okay? Because the recommendation does push you more, because it's established that the content is liked by more people, so it's able to do that. But what I would say to you and any other smaller creators out there is, don't underestimate just how important those 825 subscribers are. Because if you were a band and you'd been playing for 10 years and you were still doing the nightclubs, well, you might only get 250 people to pack a nightclub out, all right? But you would be chuffed to bits. You think how big a place you would have to rent out to put all 825 of your subscribers in, and it'll blow your mind, because that is a way of bringing reality back to a number. It's all too easy. But I can guarantee you now, if you go and look at your views, they are much, much higher than your 825 subscribers. Okay, so don't just look at the subscribers, because the subscriber, I know it's nice to have them, but the subscriber count is just a vanity metric. Yes, it gives us a little bit more social proof, but it's just a vanity metric. What's most important is how many what's most important is how many people are actually viewing. Now, if you had 825 subscribers and then over the month you're only getting 100 views, then there's an issue. But if you're getting more than 825 views in a month, then it's a good thing. So don't be disheartened by it. Excuse me, guys. And when I know we're going off topic here, but what I would say to you guys is, with YouTube, just like compost, is up and down, guys, right? And you can have a high one day and be down in the ditch the next. And by growing slowly, the subscribers know you, they get to know you, and they stick around. When you have something go viral, they've joined for, and I give you an example. A long time ago, we did a video about the 100-hour candle, and it was designed to heat greenhouses. A brilliant video, and it done really well for us. And then the video died a death, and then all of a sudden one year it went ballistic. And what had happened was that video got shared with the prepping community, and they were using it like a storm candle. So we had all these views and people were subscribing because of this video. And then, over the next couple of months, we had all these people leaving the channel. And I was like, what the hell's going on? But when we actually looked at that, it turned out that they just wasn't the right viewer or the right subscriber for the channel. So don't be disheartened. Build slow, and you know that you're going to be secure. Right, let's move on. Oh, I took my throat. Sorry, guys. Right. Hi, Tony. Have you ever tried using fabric grow bags? I have. Would you recommend them for growing potatoes? Starting my first garden this year. Love your channel. Thanks a lot. Yes, I would recommend them over growing in the ground. However, I wouldn't recommend them for busy people, because they will do the job, but they dry out very quickly. You need to be on your game when it comes to watering and keeping them moist, or you're going to end up with scab all over your potatoes because they've dried out. You're going to end up with a smaller crop. And that's why I like the plastic buckets, because they contain that water. It doesn't evaporate. You think about a cloth bag, it can evaporate from all directions, okay? With the container, it can only evaporate from the top. But if we've got a straw mulch on there, or a grass mulch, then there's hardly any evaporation. The plant is using it, or it's running out the bottom. Yeah. So as long as you can stay on top of the watering, there's no problem with them at all. Lee Hawkins saw, would it be okay to plant the carrot and onion seeds into pots now with the weather as it is without putting them into the greenhouse, Tony? So Onions, no problem. If you're sowing carrots, I wouldn't suggest putting them in pots unless you're doing like in a 30-litre container, right? Because carrots don't like being transplanted. Okay, you're going to end up having the root all sort of splitting on you and sort of going off into all different little sort of fingers and everything else. All right, so plant the carrots in situ unless it's in a 30-litre container that you plan on them letting them live for the rest of their life. Okay, don't transplant them. All right, but onions, yeah, fine, they can be potted up and transplanted out at any point. They're quite resilient. And the last question here, guys, would it be able to okay to plant the carrot and any seeds in the pot? All right, it's the same question. Sorry. So, Jay put it up for you, so I do apologize for that. Right, that's great. So, let's get back to this before we shoot off then. So, we're talking about growing now and feeding. We've already spoken about that. And then we're looking to harvest. So we've got multiple things we can do. So as we're harvesting one crop, we can be planning another. So we could be potentially growing, another crop in some modules in a greenhouse or the potting shed or something like that. And as soon as we harvest one plant, we can put it in. And then, so we've got this continual growth process. And as Scott can confirm, we had a chat about, a live chat like this about crop rotation. It's on the channel, so go and search it out. And I believe it's on Scott's as well. And this this whole process of planting on, so once we've harvested something, planting something else, essentially that's a crop rotation within 1 year. And this is why we don't need to do crop rotations on a yearly basis in your garden, because you're alternating that with multiple successional sowings. So we may harvest carrots and then we may put like spinach in there, or we may put lettuce in there afterwards, or we may put some winter greens in there, or we may harvest potatoes and then follow that on with carrots. So there's all sorts of things that you're doing to keep that garden full for as long as possible. And then we are planning for winter. So we are then looking at things like cold weather crops that we can grow in the polytunnel throughout the year. But what are we doing with our beds at this point? So we've already touched on this. We are looking at things like cover crops. Yeah, we're looking at compost. We want to be putting layers on that ground that are going to now feed those beds right the way through the winter, protect them from the erosion, ready for the next year. As we're harvesting the crops, we will leave some of them stay a bit longer and go to seed so we can collect that seed. And then we need to dry that seed, package it properly, ready for sowing next year. And at which point we then get back onto the next set of jobs that we want to do throughout the winter. Changing what didn't quite work so well. So we can look back at it now and go, do you know what? Having that water barrel there got in my way so many times this year, I'm going to move it. And this is where your garden will evolve, because you've had a year's worth of growing in there. You'll know what you need to be doing, especially if you're sort of following this sort of month by month section in the back of this book, where it's telling you exactly what you should be doing at this time of year in the garden. And it allows you to be able to make sure you're staying on track with the jobs, because what we find with gardeners is they stay out of the garden. Gardening is a year-round thing, all right? And if you've got big jobs to do, you do them in the winter. And what we find is a lot of people, they stay out of the garden all winter long. And if there's snow on the ground, it's a bit different, right? But if it's just because it's wet or whatever, then it's not so much of an issue, right? But they stay out of the garden when they should be doing that work then, because then they wait till spring, and all of a sudden they want to do these jobs, but they've got sewing to do, they've got this, that, and the other to do, and before they know it, the jobs don't get done. They're feeling a bit rushed and overwhelmed. So by following the principles in the month by month in this, then you are able to stay on track and get into your next year. And by this point, you will have harvested reaped all of that vegetables for your own consumption at home, and you'll be saving it and storing that and using that then throughout the winter. So that's really what your first vegetable garden was all about, and I hope that you guys have found some sort of value in this. Like I said, tell everybody the book is out on the 7th of April, and like I said, I've got hard copies here. For those of you who haven't already, there is the emails down in the description below, so that if you want to express interest in getting a signed copy, obviously I know roughly what the postage will be. It'll be more expensive than buying it from Amazon and other bookshops, because obviously I've got to purchase the books, get them sent to me. I've got to sign them, and then I've got to post them out. So there's going to be that sort of, the book itself won't be more expensive. The signature is not going to cost you anything. But obviously then there's the postage out, which you may get for free with Prime or something like that. So you need to take that into factor. But just wanted to offer them for the time being, all right? But those of you that come across and email me on those email addresses, I'll contact you and say, right, okay, yeah, I can get it done. It's going to be this. If you want me to, I'll raise like a PayPal receipt for you, and then you can pay me, and I'll get that sorted out for you, and they'll be sent out then either on the date or just slightly after the date that they go live, all right? Anyway, guys, thank you very much for joining me in this live stream. Don't forget, tomorrow, I think I'm going to make the video a little bit later. I think I'll set it for, say, 7 o'clock tomorrow evening, and I'm going to set it up as a premiere for this raised garden bed filling video. So make sure you come across to that and share that out as well. So I'll be doing that first thing in the morning, so that it's scheduled for 7 o'clock tomorrow.